Commander Thrix stood at the helm of the Novolith warship Stellar Dominance, his iridescent scales shifting colors with anticipation. The target planet hung before them like a blue jewel in the vast darkness of space. According to their intelligence, this was supposed to be Proxima 7, a primitive colony world ripe for conquest. Atmospheric entry vectors calculated, Commander, announced Navigation Officer Vex, her crystalline antennae pulsing with data streams. Defense systems appear, primitive. Nothing matching our database expectations. Thrix's inner eyelids flickered with concern. Something felt wrong. The Novolith Empire had conquered 17 worlds across 3 star systems, and never had their intelligence been this far off. The planet below showed signs of industrialization, but nothing approaching the level of development their scouts had reported. Begin the descent sequence, Thrix ordered, pushing aside his doubts. The invasion fleet of 30 ships began their choreographed descent through the atmosphere, their quantum shields dispersing the heat of entry into brilliant auroral displays. First Officer Naira approached, her tentacles writhing with nervous energy. Commander, I'm detecting anomalous readings from the surface. The electromagnetic signatures, they're not consistent with our target profile. Before Thrix could respond, the ship's AI interface, core, interrupted with an urgent alert. Warning, temporal displacement detected. Local date-time verification indicates significant chronological error. Thrix's scales paled to a ghostly white. Explain. Sir, Naira's voice trembled, according to these readings, we're not just on the wrong planet. We're in the wrong time. This is Earth, circa 2024. The command deck fell silent. Earth, the legendary homeworld of humanity, the species that would eventually spread across the galaxy like a virus, establishing the Terran Federation that would become the Novolith Empire's greatest rival. But this was Earth before its golden age, before its great leap into the stars. Abort invasion protocol. Thrix roared, but it was too late. The ground forces had already begun their deployment, drop pods streaking through the sky like falling stars. On the surface, humans reacted with panic and confusion. Military forces scrambled, but their weapons were centuries behind what they would become. Police and emergency services rushed to respond to what many thought was a natural phenomenon. Sir, Vex called out, her antennae now a deep crimson, I'm detecting something else. Energy signatures that don't match either our technology or Earth's current level of advancement. Through the view screen, Thrix watched as his invasion force, the pride of the Novolith military, descended into chaos. Drop pods scattered across continents, ground troops emerging into a world they were never meant to see, facing a humanity that wasn't supposed to know about alien life for another century. Get me a secure channel to all ship commanders, Thrix demanded, his scales now pulsing with urgent patterns. This isn't a simple navigation error. Something brought us here deliberately. As if in response to his words, strange readings began appearing on their sensors. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, ancient machines were stirring to life, technology that predated both humanity and the Novolith Empire. Sir, Naira whispered, I think we just walked into a trap. But the question is, whose trap is it? Thrix stared at the viewing screen, watching as his carefully planned invasion dissolved into unprecedented chaos. They had come expecting to find a primitive colony world, easy prey for the Empire's expansion. Instead, they had stumbled into something far more dangerous, a moment in history where they were never meant to be, facing a humanity that, while technologically primitive, possessed a ferocity that would one day help them dominate the stars. And somewhere, in the depths of Earth's ancient crust, something was awakening, something that had been waiting for this very moment for millennia. Sergeant Rhine crouched behind the wreckage of her drop pod, the alien metal still smoking from atmospheric entry. Her biosensors screamed warnings about the planet's unfamiliar atmosphere, while her combat visor struggled to make sense of the primitive infrastructure surrounding her. Squad status report, she hissed into her neural comm, counting the signals from her scattered unit. Only 7 of 12 showed active. The others were either dead or their systems had been compromised by whatever strange phenomenon had affected their fleet. "This isn't right," came Corporal Zexa's response, his usually steady voice wavering. "The buildings, the vehicles, the weapons they're using against us, it's all wrong." Through her visor, Ryan watched as Earth's military forces approached their position. Their vehicles crawled on primitive combustion engines and rubber wheels, their weapons still relied on chemical propellants, and their communications buzzed with easily intercepted radio waves. This wasn't the advanced colony world they had trained to subjugate. "Hold position," Ryan ordered, her scaled fingers tightening on her pulse rifle. "Something's happened to the invasion timeline. These humans, they're from their species past." An explosion rocked nearby as a human tank shell detonated against their pod's quantum-hardened hull. The humans might be technologically inferior, but they were adapting quickly to the threat, showing a resourcefulness that made Ryan's skin crawl. "Sergeant," called Private Mira, her sensor arrays picking up something new, "I'm detecting energy signatures beneath the surface. They're ancient. Older than anything in our database." Ryan's attention shifted to her own readings. Beneath the chaos of battle, something was stirring. The energy patterns were unlike anything she'd encountered in her 15 years of military service. They weren't Novolith technology, nor did they match any known human developments. "Command, this is Ground Team Alpha," Ryan transmitted. "We're picking up anomalous energy signatures. Request immediate analysis N." Her transmission cut off as a pulse of energy swept across the battlefield. Human electronics flickered and died, but the Novolith systems remained operational. In the distance, a section of ground began to shift, revealing geometric patterns that glowed with an inner light. "By the first star," Mira whispered, "those patterns, they're similar to the temporal distortion that brought us here." Ryan watched as more patterns emerged, spreading like luminous cracks across the Earth's surface. The humans had ceased their attack, equally transfixed by the phenomenon. In that moment of shared wonder, Ryan realized they weren't just in the wrong time, they were pawns in someone else's game. "Fall back to secondary positions," she ordered her squad. "Something else is at play here. Something that wanted us to." The ground beneath them trembled as a massive structure began to rise from the depths. Its surface was covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change, defying comprehension. Human and Novolith forces alike stood frozen, weapons forgotten, as the ancient machinery awakened. Through her neural link, Ryan could hear the confusion and fear spreading through the invasion force. Commands from the fleet became garbled, filled with static and strange harmonics. Even Core, their advanced AI system, seemed unable to process what was happening. "Sergeant," Zex called out, his bio-readings spiking with alarm, "the temporal readings, they're increasing. It's as if time itself is becoming unstable," Ryan finished, watching as reality seemed to ripple around the emerging structure. This wasn't just a navigation error. We were brought here, to this specific point in Earth's timeline, for a reason. In orbit, the Novolith fleet hung suspended between retreat and engagement. On the ground, human military forces regrouped, their primitive weapons seeming almost quaint against the backdrop of awakening ancient technology. And through it all, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that they were all being watched, evaluated, tested. The question wasn't just how they had ended up here, but why. What force was powerful enough to manipulate both space and time, drawing a technologically superior invasion fleet back through centuries to face a primitive Earth? And more importantly, what did they want? As if in answer to her unspoken questions, the ancient structure fully emerged, its surface now pulsing with rhythmic patterns of light. And deep within its geometric heart, something began to move. Lieutenant Pax moved silently through the abandoned human research facility, her optical camouflage rendering her nearly invisible. The structure that had emerged from the ground towered above, its crystalline surface casting strange shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. "Analysis complete," whispered her AI companion, Terra, through her neural implant. The facility's data archives indicate they've been studying unusual energy signatures in this region for decades. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Pax's bioluminescent markings pulsed with curiosity as she accessed the data through her neural interface. The humans had detected something buried deep beneath their feet, but their primitive instruments could barely scratch the surface of what it truly was. Cross-reference with our fleet's database, she commanded, moving deeper into the facility. The walls around her were covered in hastily abandoned research notes and diagnostic readouts. Look for any similar structures across known space. Terra's response came with an undertone of concern. No exact matches found. However, there are references to similar energy signatures in restricted files. Files that predate the Novolith Empire itself. A distant explosion rocked the building, the sounds of continued battle between human forces and their stranded invasion fleet. But Pax barely noticed, her attention fixed on a massive holographic display that had suddenly activated before her. The display showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, but not as it existed in their time. This was older, much older, showing stellar configurations that hadn't existed for millions of years. And scattered throughout were points of light, each marking a structure identical to the one that had just emerged. Their waypoints, Pax breathed, her markings now glowing with excitement. No, more than that. Their observation posts. As if responding to her words, the ancient structure's surface began to shift, revealing intricate patterns that pulsed with a deep, rhythmic light. Each pulse sent waves of temporal energy washing across the landscape, causing reality itself to ripple and distort. "Lieutenant," Terra interrupted, "I'm detecting multiple entities approaching. Their energy signatures, they're unlike anything in our records." Through the facility's windows, Pax watched as figures emerged from the structure. They moved with an impossible grace, their forms seeming to exist in multiple dimensions at once. They weren't solid beings like humans or Novolith, but rather collections of light and energy given consciousness. "They're the Watchers," she whispered, pieces of ancient legends suddenly falling into place. Stories told around stellar nurseries of beings who had seeded the galaxy with life, who had guided the evolution of countless species from afar. Her neural comm crackled with urgent transmissions from both the fleet and ground forces. Everyone was seeing them now, the ancient observers finally revealing themselves after eons of silence. "All Novolith forces, hold your positions," came Commander Thrix's voice, strained but commanding. "Do not engage the entities. Repeat, do not engage." But the Watchers weren't interested in combat. They moved through the battlefield, their presence causing weapons on both sides to deactivate. Where they passed, the chaos of battle fell silent, replaced by a deep sense of awe. Pax activated her long-range scanner, trying to capture as much data as possible. "Terra, what are they doing?" "Analysis suggests they're creating some kind of temporal barrier," the AI responded. "The energy readings, they're stabilizing the time stream around us. Preventing further temporal damage from our presence here." One of the Watchers turned toward Pax, its form shifting through colors that her eyes couldn't fully process. In that moment, she felt a presence in her mind, ancient, vast, and undeniably conscious. "You were brought here for a purpose," the thought echoed through her consciousness. "Your arrival was not an accident, but a necessity." "A necessity for what?" Pax asked aloud, her markings pulsing with a mix of fear and fascination. The answer came not in words, but in a series of images that flooded her mind: a future where humanity and the Novolith Empire destroyed each other in endless war, a galaxy torn apart by their conflict, and something darker lurking behind it all, a threat that neither species could face alone. "Understanding requires perspective," the Watcher communicated. "Sometimes, to prevent a future, one must first visit the past." As the implications of those words sank in, Pax realized that their accidental invasion might have been orchestrated by beings playing a game across millennia. The question was, what role were they meant to play in this cosmic drama? Captain Lyra watched from her command pod as the Watcher's temporal barrier spread across the sky like an aurora of impossible colors. Her neural implants struggled to process the overlapping waves of energy that rippled through both space and time. "Multiple human military units converging on our position," reported her tactical officer, Nexus, his crystalline interface glowing with incoming data. "But they're hesitating. The Watcher's presence has disrupted their command structure." The humans had good reason to hesitate. Their world had been invaded twice in a single day, first by the Novolith Empire's forces, and now by entities that defied their understanding of reality itself. Through her enhanced vision, Lyra could see their primitive vehicles holding position, weapons trained on both her forces and the ancient structure. "Status of our ground teams?" she asked, watching as another wave of temporal energy washed over the battlefield. "Scattered but holding," Nexus replied. "Sergeant Ryan's squad is maintaining a defensive perimeter around the southern section. Lieutenant Pax is still inside the human research facility, attempting to decode more information about the Watchers." A sudden burst of communication cut through their channel, Commander Thrix's voice, but distorted by interference from the temporal barrier. "All units, critical information, the Watchers, showing US something." The transmission dissolved into static, but Lyra had already begun to see it herself. The barrier wasn't just stabilizing time, it was showing them glimpses of potential futures. She saw flashes of battles yet to come, worlds burning as humanity and the Novolith Empire tore each other apart in an endless cycle of violence. "Captain," Nexus called out, his voice tight with urgency, energy spike from the ancient structure. "Something's happening." The geometric monolith that had emerged from the earth began to pulse with increasing intensity. Each beat sent out waves that seemed to bend reality itself, creating windows into different times and places. Through these temporal apertures, Lyra saw something that made her blood run cold. "By the first star," she whispered, "there's something else out there. Something worse than our war with humanity." The visions showed a darkness moving between the stars, consuming everything in its path. Neither the Novolith Empire nor humanity's future forces could stand against it alone. Their mutual destruction would leave the galaxy vulnerable to this greater threat. "Multiple temporal anomalies forming," Nexus reported, his interface now blazing with alerts. "The Watchers, they're trying to show us something specific." Through the chaos of overlapping time streams, a single image became clear: humans and Novolith fighting side by side, their combined strength holding back the encroaching darkness. But that future could only exist if something changed here, in this moment. "Captain!" One of her soldiers called out in panic. "The humans, they're moving." Lyra turned to see the Earth forces advancing, but not with hostile intent. Their weapons were lowered, and a single figure stepped forward, a human commander who seemed to understand that this moment transcended their immediate conflict. Through her neural link, Lyra received a transmission from Lieutenant Pax: "The Watchers engineered this entire scenario. They brought us here, to this specific point in Earth's timeline, because this is where everything can change. This is where we either continue down the path of mutual destruction or we learn to see beyond our differences," Lyra finished, making her decision. She opened her command pod and stepped out, exposed to the Earth's atmosphere. Her suit's filters processed the unfamiliar air as she walked toward the human commander. Above them, the temporal barrier continued to pulse with visions of possible futures. The Watchers moved silently through the battlefield, their presence a reminder that this moment had been orchestrated across millions of years. "We were never meant to conquer this world," Lyra realized, speaking both to her forces and to the humans who could hear her through their primitive translation devices. "We were brought here to prevent a future that would doom us all." The human commander stepped forward, matching her gesture of peace. Behind them, the ancient structure's pulsing reached a crescendo, and in that moment, both sides began to understand the true purpose of this impossible invasion. Commander Thrix stood on Earth's soil, breathing its alien air through his filtration system as the temporal barrier above cast ethereal light across the landscape. Around him, Human and Novolith forces had formed an uneasy circle around the ancient structure, weapons lowered but not forgotten. "The barrier is stabilizing," First Officer Naira reported through his neural link. "The Watchers are containing the temporal damage from our presence here." But temporal damage wasn't what concerned Thrix anymore. Through the barrier's shifting waves, he could see what the Watchers had been trying to show them, glimpses of a future that would unfold unless this moment, this impossible meeting of past and present, changed everything. Lieutenant Pax emerged from the human research facility, her bioluminescent markings pulsing with urgency. "Commander, I've decoded more of their archives. The Watchers, they've been guiding both our species since the beginning. This moment, this meeting, it's been part of their plan for millions of years." Captain Lyra approached with the human commander, whose name they'd learned was Colonel Bennett. The colonel's primitive combat gear seemed almost quaint next to Lyra's advanced battle suit, yet there was a strength in his bearing that Thrix couldn't deny. "Your officer," Bennett spoke through a hastily configured translator, "she showed us what's coming. This darkness between the stars, it's real." Before Thrix could respond, the ancient structure pulsed again, and the Watchers gathered around them. Their forms shifted through impossible geometries as they projected a final vision, the most complete picture of what was to come. The darkness wasn't just a force of destruction, it was an ancient intelligence that had been sleeping in the void between galaxies. In the original timeline, it would awaken to find a galaxy weakened by the war between humanity and the Novolith Empire. But now, with this intervention, there was a chance to change that future. Understanding requires sacrifice, the Watchers communicated simultaneously to all present. Knowledge gained must be preserved, yet time must be protected. Sergeant Rhine, who had fought against the humans hours earlier, stepped forward. "The temporal barrier, it's not just containing damage. It's preparing to erase this event from history, isn't it?" The answer came in waves of confirmation through their minds. This meeting would be wiped from the timeline, but not its impact. Each participant would retain a subconscious memory, a deep-seated understanding that would influence decisions yet to come. "So when we return to our time," Thrix realized, "we won't remember this directly, but it will change how we see humanity. And the humans. We'll retain an instinctive knowledge," Colonel Bennett finished. "Not of your specific invasion, but of the greater threat. Of the need for unity when it comes." The Watchers began to move in complex patterns around the structure, their energy building. The temporal barrier started to pulse more rapidly, reality itself preparing to reset. "The seed of understanding is planted," they communicated. "When the time comes, you will know what must be done." Thrix looked at the humans one last time, these primitive versions of their future greatest rivals. He saw in them not the enemy they'd come to conquer, but the allies they would need to become. "Prepare for temporal reversion," he commanded his forces, even as the barrier's light grew blinding. "And remember, not the details, but the truth." The structure's pulse reached its peak, and reality began to fold in on itself. The last thing Thrix saw was Colonel Bennett nodding in understanding, both leaders knowing that while this moment would be erased, its purpose would echo through time. As the temporal barrier collapsed and history began to rewrite itself, the Watcher's final message resonated through all present: the future is not written, but guided. When darkness comes, remember this light. In an instant, the invasion that never was ceased to be. The Novolith fleet returned to its proper time, its crews carrying an inexplicable but profound shift in their understanding of humanity. And on Earth, in 2024, those who had witnessed the impossible found themselves awakening from what seemed like a shared dream, but carrying within them a new awareness of what lay ahead. The Watchers returned to their ageless vigil, their intervention complete. They had planted the seeds of unity in both species, ensuring that when the true threat emerged, ancient enemies would stand together against the darkness between stars. End.